The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Hello, welcome to Star Warsologies, a podcast about science and other fields of study connected with Star Wars. I'm one of your hosts, James Floyd. I'm a freelance writer, and I write for Star Wars Insider Magazine.
And I'm Melissa Miller, your other co-host. I also write for Star Wars Insider Magazine and lots of other science outlets. On this episode, Star Warsologies is going to chat about empathy and compassion, as seen in Star Wars by things like Vader and Finn's changes of heart, Rey's character, and lots of other examples. Our guest expert today is Maureen Day. She is an associate professor of religion and society at the Franciscan School of Theology. Welcome, Maureen.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, welcome.
Can you quickly define empathy? Let's start there.
Sure, yeah, empathy. There are different interpretations, and the definition I'm going to offer for today's episode is not supposed to be better than other people's theories. It's just going to be the working definition that I'll use today. And that's simply having the feeling that you're sharing the same feeling with somebody else. So if someone else is experiencing sorrow, you're connecting to that sorrow. So if someone's just lost their job, maybe you're thinking back to the experience of losing your job yourself. And even if you don't have that same experience, some connection of loss, you're trying to connect with that other person's emotions with empathy. And I'm going to compare it a little bit with what I'll define as sympathy and compassion. So sympathy is understanding someone else's feelings without necessarily entering into that too deeply yourself. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people kind of give sympathy like the bad rap as far as the sympathy-empathy pairing. And sometimes it is. So for instance, maybe you have pity for somebody. You kind of feel bad for them, but you have this affective or relational distance between yourself and the other person. But sometimes it's because, someone's approached you for advice. And so rather than entering into that feeling with them, you're trying to take different perspectives to see it different ways and problem solve with them. So sympathy doesn't have to be a bad thing necessarily. But then there's also compassion. Compassion has to have empathy. Compassion means literally to suffer with someone. So you're not going to have empathy of joy when you're talking about compassion. It's always understanding that someone's suffering with you, and then you feel a little bit of that suffering within yourself, but also you take the next step of actually doing something. So that feeling of compassion pushes you to some sort of action. So that's the three main things. And I'm going to try to stick to those definitions of empathy, compassion, and sympathy. And I'll try to use those words deliberately. I might slip up here and there, but
interesting, because we know that the Emperor tells Vader that Luke's compassion for you will be his undoing. And so that registers in our own mind that we kind of have this general sense of what compassion is. But then when you really think about it, that Luke is trying to make a change. He sees where his father is at, and maybe he doesn't quite understand it because he hasn't gone to the dark side himself, but he is taking that action. So.
Yes.
Okay, so that is compassion. The Emperor used it with Maureen's same definition.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, how did you come to study empathy, and how do you study empathy?
So I'm a virtue ethicist. I'm actually on an interdisciplinary trajectory of my career. So I don't just study empathy. I study virtue ethics, sociological research methods, or what I use for when I'm doing studies. And then I'm also integrating it with theology. So I do a mixture of these different things when I'm approaching empathy. But so I teach moral theology, which is a combination of the approach of ethics, the teaching of ethics, but it's integrated with Christian spirituality as well. The philosophy, you can talk about business ethics, technology ethics, that sort of thing. But we're talking typically about the ethics of human behavior, both individually and in social groups. I have always been fascinated and loving of human people. I would joke that they're my favorite animal. I've always thought that people are amazing and wonderful. And so studying kind of what is meaningful to us as individuals and as groups and what we rally around, what we neglect. And just kind of what causes us to flourish and what can even lead to our demise. So that's kind of where I'm coming at this all from.
Very interdisciplinary.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your relationship with Star Wars. When did you become a fan? Do you integrate it into your work at all?
Not so much, but not so little either. So as far as when I first became exposed to Star Wars, so I was born in 78. So I was a little too little to catch the first wave of the theaters and all of that. But I did have cousins who were 12 years older than me who came over all the time. And we owned the original, which is now called episode 4 videotape. And I saw that over and over when the older cousins would come over and get extremely stressed in the trash compactor scene. I had too much empathy. And when Luke got pulled under, I understood as a small child, he's drowning. Like, this is no joke. And then in my college years, there was the other episodes soon followed. So this was all very exciting in my sort of coming of age. So I teach at a Franciscan institution, which Franciscans are an order, a religious order within the Catholic Church. And I did my graduate studies in a Jesuit institution, which is another religious order in the Catholic Church. And both of these traditions believe that you can see God in the world around us. Something does not need to be explicitly religious in order for it to be able to reveal something about God to us. And so with this, all of the stories we tell, whether it's Star Wars or Indiana Jones or whatever sort of stories that have captured our imaginations, they have moral lessons and they tell us who the heroes are, who are the villains, what we should pursue, what we should avoid. I try to pull these things in for my students as well into the classroom. So basically, what I try to do is connect things that matter to people in everyday life and show them how these things reveal moral goodness, their own goodness, their worth, all of these things to themselves. So I try to build these connections as a sociologist, as a theologian, as a human person.
So what are some of those connections that maybe you would point to right away? Obviously in Star Wars, we have the light side and the dark side.
Sure.
What characters kind of stick out with you as examples of particular aspects of human nature?
Sure. That's a great question. There's lots of philosophies and philosophical theories on what makes a human person, right? And so I like to kind of situate myself in what's called the critical realist tradition within philosophy, especially what is called like the strand of personalism. One of the things that I do is I try to use the word human person rather than human nature. And I think Star Wars goes along with this as well. Human nature seems to be like a bit static. It's kind of formed and it's done. It kind of emphasizes the universal more than what's particular to each of us. So human person, we're dynamic, we're developing, we're particular, we're unique, all of these kind of things. When I start to think about like Star Wars speak and like, what does that look like? What does personhood look like within Star Wars? With virtue ethics, we really believe that there are things about our lives that allow us to flourish, and there are things that destroy us, right? And whether or not you're coming from like a Christian perspective, you might say, oh, it's holiness is the one and the other one is sin, or if you're coming from a very humanitarian perspective, or you're just talking about the flourishing of virtues or motivations that are causing us to be our better selves versus things that kind of lead us to unhealthy behavior. But basically, virtues lead us towards the light side and, allow us to see the individual characters flourishing as they're following these virtues. And as they start to turn away from these virtues and follow destructive paths, then we see them start to go into the dark side. And they can come in incremental steps. They can be a slow, gradual thing, or it can be a sudden jump into a precipice, never look back sort of action. And it's also not an either or. I think I appreciate that in the movies as well, that people struggle. There's not just like the infallible hero and the demonic villain. There's a lot of everything and an internal struggle and turmoil going on with the characters as well, which is just a lot more reflective of real life as well.
Right. Yeah, it always stands out to me how literally like sort of black and white both sides are, right? Like both the Sith and the Jedi are just, all the teachings and the wise, words and stuff like that are all just so absolute. Yeah, like you said, every single character, there's more to them than that. There's no one who like can live up to that or match those standards or anything like that.
And maybe that's the thing is, they have these rules and they know that it's a daily conversion to keep following those rules, that they're trying the best they can. And, sometimes you get it right and sometimes you end up destroying your entire order and plunging the galaxy into chaos.
Yeah. And I think too, something that virtue ethics brings to a conversation about human personhood is that, we have these virtues, just to name a few: compassion, generosity, humility, gratitude, fidelity, joy, kindness, prudence, hope, love, trust, all of these things. These are all things that we can see how they can lead to our flourishing and help us to be better. But, the vices, there's some that are, the opposite of compassion would be callousness, for instance, and we can see how that can be it would be bad for the human person to live a calloused life and how that would close us off to others. And I was listening to some of the other episodes, and the psychology episode talked about loyalty. Well, loyalty has a shadow side to it. And, so in virtue ethics, we use fidelity as the virtue, but loyalty can be the vice, right? So fidelity would mean that we are faithful to this person, but being faithful means challenging them when they're starting to go off the path too, right? If you see your best friend making bad choices, if you're really their best friend, you're going to speak up about it, as opposed to just being loyal, which is, I'm just going to go along with it because I want to be on your side. And that's bad for both of the people in the relationship.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I'd never thought about it that way before. There's always the thought that like Chewbacca was kind of a little bit of Han's moral compass, early on, that maybe it was Chewbacca that got Han to turn around and bring the Falcon back to save Luke at the Battle of the Death Star. So it's like he was being faithful to Han's better heroic qualities maybe than Han was, if you buy into that theory.
Yeah, I love the idea of like a conversation we didn't get to see of Chewbacca, like, appealing to his better angels or whatever, right? Or maybe tricking him into it, being like, what they wouldn't expect is if we went back there, but all in like, like Wookiee.
And maybe the threat of just getting your arms ripped off is, Chewie, okay, settle down. I'll do this because, you're bigger than me.
Well, are there any characters that you would say are particularly empathic?
Yeah, so I think that when we think about empathy versus sympathy piece, I think a great way to compare that to compassion is the Sith have a lot of empathy. They know what Anakin is thinking when he's going through struggles of fear and anger and all of those things. So they're very aware of the feelings, but they're not there to suffer with the person, right? They're there to use that emotion in a different way. Like a torturer very much knows how the person who he's torturing is feeling, but there's no compassion. Probably just sympathy. Whereas, to look for characters that have compassion, I think, first of all, if we could be characters ourselves as watchers of the story, right? We're invited to be compassionate towards Vader. Initially, when we first see episode 4, we're like, oh, like this is the bad guy. But as the story evolves, we're like, wow, he's complicated. And at the very end, he changes. And then when we have the prequel trilogy, suddenly we have like this backstory. And then we see, oh, this is how he became this way. And so we're invited to be compassionate for this person who's very destructive later episodes, but we understand why. And we see his lack of compassion as well, though, early, because he kills the Tusken Raiders, the women and the children after his mother dies. So we see how he's struggling from the very get-go. But we see Luke do the same thing in the sequel trilogy. When he's in Kylo Ren's room, he's about to kill an unarmed sleeping child. Like, what is this? And so we see this lack of compassion across these different characters, as well as compassion. We see Vader having compassion. We see Finn having compassion. The other stormtroopers who decide not to become stormtroopers once they're in battle. And really kind of these experiences trigger questions for them. And then it has a change of heart and a transformation for them.
Yeah, I never really thought about just how many redemption arcs there are in Star Wars. It's like with all the Disney movies now that are like from the villain's perspective or whatever. Like, I don't need, and this we talked about, I know, a little bit with our psychologist, how do you forgive somebody for these atrocities, right? Like Vader having a redemption arc, like how are we supposed to feel about that at the end when you think about how many people, so many, probably 1 billion that Darth Vader has killed, and we're just supposed to be like, oh, but Luke has his dad back. Isn't that nice? Like, I do struggle with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly what would the galaxy have done, had Vader lived? It'd be like, okay, we're going to put you on the biggest war crimes trial that ever existed. Would his change of heart be like, yes, I did all of those things. I am responsible for all those things, and I face the galaxy's judgment.
Right. Yeah. I guess I'm saying I don't have sympathy for Vader, at least. And even though I ship Rey and Kylo, same thing. Like his was even more like petulant child, but like atrocities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how, I also don't feel sympathy for him when they have their redemption arcs, but I do for Finn.
Right. Well, Finn also, I think it was so early on, right? And this is part of the whole understanding from virtue ethics, like the further you are into virtue or vice, right? So the more you've practiced kindness, the the harder it is for any one action to like pull you out of kindness, right? And the more you've practiced callousness, the harder it is to pull you out of that phase. And so the further you are on either a virtuous or a vicious path, so a light side or a dark side sort of path, the harder it is to pull you back towards that center.
So the dark side will dominate your destiny. Once you start down that dark path, it keeps kind of reinforcing that rut that you're getting into of doing things like callousness or selfishness.
Right. Part of it too is that we can see how all of these characters who were further along on their dark side path, when they got pulled back, it was because of relationships, right? Someone believed in them and someone cared and someone was putting effort and time. Whereas this is why I think we don't see it in Palpatine. Like, we don't know any of his virtuous relationships. There was no one reaching out for him. And I don't know if he just isn't allowed an arc. I don't know what if there's like a deeper story that no, he is absolute evil, and this is his role that he is in this film.
I hope we don't get like a series that's like young Palpatine and what. Like, I don't need to feel sorry for him. No. I don't need the backstory. Yeah, I really hope not, honestly.
But there is that kind of parallel that Luke goes to redeem Vader, and it's like Rey doesn't choose to redeem her grandfather. That is like, no, we need to end this. We need to stop. And maybe part of that is not necessarily compassion for him. It's compassion for the galaxy. That is like, this is a cancer that will destroy everything. And so I need to do my part and, step up to end this threat. Looking out after your friends, I think, is the stronger message of their heroics. Because, why do we root for them? It's not because they're trying to save the galaxy. It's because they're saving each other, their friendships, and they're looking after each other. And even at the end in Rise of Skywalker, Rey is like, I got to do this alone. And Finn's like, yeah, we're going to do this alone together. And then later on, it's like, how did you win? And Lando's like, we did this because we had each other. It's just the reinforcement of being connected.
Yes. And I think that is a major, like if this were an Aesop's fable, that would be one of the morals at the end of the Star Wars story, is that as far as the human spirit goes, we are at our best when we're working together. And that's a really key piece. That community, belonging, relationship, all of that is really key.
Yeah, James, the way you said it made me realize that there's like that exact line in Lord of the Rings too, right? Not that we're surprised that there's some similar storylines, but yeah, just the way you said it made me think of like the Hobbits, right? When Frodo's like, I have to do it myself. And they're like, of course you do. And we're coming with you, or something like that. So it's a good story. It's a good arc. We love it.
Also, in the Lego movie, when they say everything is awesome, everything is cool when you're part of a team.
There you go. Also good. Well, when you were talking about human person earlier, I mean, that all makes sense to me, the difference in words and stuff like that. But when we're talking about Star Wars, there are humans, and then there's many other sentient species. So, we don't have that here on Earth. So how do you sort of separate out thinking about humans whose minds we can understand versus species who are more complicated than that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that as far as from a personalist perspective, we have human persons and we know what those are, right? So as far as a philosophical system, we've defined those. But that doesn't mean that there aren't persons beyond the human person, right? And so as far as alien persons, like what does that look like? What are the kind of the goods and the virtues and the flourishings that these different species would point to as far as their personhood? So I don't know if we're talking about droids at this point.
I mean, definitely talking about sentience always leads right into droids. So let's just do it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, just thinking about droids, even as we as human persons have talked about what does personhood mean, even when we've confined personhood, even just to people, humans, not just other animals who are also thinking and feeling, even when we're talking about non-persons, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be protections for non-persons. And then even from a person-centric perspective, we would still want non-persons to be protected, because what we know from moral development is how we treat non-persons actually does affect us as people. So if we treat animals or the earth or robots as simply a means to an end, we come to actually view other people as means to ends as well. Even if we don't necessarily create rights for non-persons in American society, we still would want to think about, well, what are the protections we would want to offer? In and of itself, just like, okay, we want to protect wetlands and the air and these sorts of things for the benefit of everybody. But also, like, if we are just using and disposing of something, like, what does that do to us? And how does that affect how we're going to treat other people?
Basically, it just comes back to compassion that, you have this feeling and you feel this way and it gets you to act in a certain way, that it's like, okay, I feel like these things should be protected. I'm going to advocate for that because they have value in and of themselves, not just whatever value humans can derive from them.
Right.
Well, and the clone army is wild on so many levels. But James, maybe you'll remember the exact wording here. Like, aren't the clones bred to have like a higher instance of sort of violent tendencies and a lower instance of compassion?
Maybe not exactly that, but certainly they are bred from a template of Jango Fett, who, is a bounty hunter. He has very little qualm about killing people and getting paid for it. At the same time, they're also bred to be more obedient, less independent thinking, so that they're easier to control. What that does to their sense of virtues, when they're brought up in an environment where they're kind of denied the main human things that we have a sense of, the idea of family, they create their own families in a sense that, they see each other all as brothers and look after each other. And if you've been watching Bad Batch, you can see that taken to an extreme of their loyalty starts to extend. It's like, we're not loyal to the Republic or the Empire so much as we are loyal to our brothers.
And the same sort of thing actually can be found in studies of the military.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask soldiers, like, why are they fighting in battle? Very rarely is it like the political sound bites that politicians are saying that this is what's at stake in this war.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's like, I'm fighting for the lives of the people I'm fighting alongside, and the sense of camaraderie and community seems to be really what's animating people.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, with our military, they also have the sense, they're fighting for their country or the folks back home or something. And the clones don't have that. And then the Jedi are in charge of them. And it's like, how do the Jedi feel having people who have been bought and born and raised to do one thing?
Yeah, I really got to watch Bad Batch. I know I'm missing out. I hear really good things. So I'm wondering if there's, in terms of your students and talking to people about virtue ethics, is there a good takeaway from Star Wars that you can point to? Or, I mean, I know because it's written sort of, I don't want to say haphazardly, but inconsistently, perhaps is a word. It's not like from episode 1 to episode 9. It's like, oh, here's your big ethical takeaway in a nice bow or anything like that. So is there something that you can use to relate to everyday life?
Well, I think one of the big themes is both the Sith and the Jedi talk about listening to your feelings as a moral guide, and which is interesting because both of them, end up in very different paths in listening to their feelings. And I encourage my students to listen to their feelings. However, my caveat is that which feelings are you listening to, right? And so what sort of feelings or what emotional state are you in when you're making this discernment, when you're making this choice, and when you're responding to an event? And, if your feelings are grounded in those virtues, like trust, hope, love, forgiveness, all of these things, you're going to tend to make a good choice. If, however, you're grounded in fear, denial, hate, you're probably not going to make a choice that's good for you or the community that's going to be affected by that choice. And so I think that's a really important thing. And I think if I can have a beef with Yoda is he keeps naming anger as a dangerous emotion. However, anger is a very appropriate response to injustice, whether it's injustice committed against us or against somebody else. We can feel grief, we can feel compassion for a suffering group, but anger is also a very appropriate response. And I think maybe where the Star Wars approach to feelings could be nuanced a bit, it's distinguishing anger from rage. Rage is not a healthy emotion for us. It's not something that's going to push us in a good direction. It's going to get us vengeful and all of these things that can destroy us internally. But anger, I think, has an important quality and can point us in a good moral direction. I think that would be a takeaway I'd offer anyone thinking about ethics in Star Wars and, wanting to use it as a moral guide.
looking at anger, but also then, the Jedi have this rule of no attachments, which kind of goes this sense of, community and connecting with people. And it's like they want to detach a little bit. How does that play out?
So this is where I would add another nuance. Attachments, that just depends, I think, on how we mean something. I'm attached to my children, right? I feel like love my children. We're in a positive and healthy relationship with each other. But that's different from wanting to possess or control them. If we have an attachment where we will the good of another and that we are growing through that relationship, that's a positive. But if we have an attachment that it's about controlling something or wanting to reduce its freedom, then that's something that's an unhealthy attachment for both parties. And so really it's about willing the good of another and having those particular relationships. I mean, the Jedi were mentored, right? They had those attachments to the mentor-mentee relationship was really important. And so to lose that, I think that's actually when you can start to lose your moral guide, when everyone kind of blends into each other and suddenly loses their particularity. And that's an important aspect of personhood, is to have particularity.
I was just thinking about how much shorter the Skywalker saga would be if Professor Maureen Day spoke at the Jedi Temple, sit down on the carpet, crisscross applesauce, and had some discussions with the younglings, like
Yeah.
halfway through episode 1, just roll credits, Anakin Skywalker turns out perfectly well adjusted.
Well,
Right.
I was going to say, bring his mom so that he can be well formed.
Oh, yeah. No, seems like the most basic thing to do is that what they see in him is fear. He's concerned about his mom. It's like, well, yeah, because she's stuck as a slave on a backwater planet that he came from. They could free her. They could get her, a job so that maybe he doesn't get to see her very often, but that he knows she's safe. She's cared for and maybe gets to connect with her from time to time. And, yeah, it would make him a lot healthier.
Yeah, just roll credits at the end of episode 1, or, if you came in later when they were teenagers or whatever, we could roll credits halfway through episode 2 if you got to Anakin and talk to him about attachment to Padme versus, what did you use? Possession or control of Padme.
Yeah, like obsession kind of. He's more in love with the idea of Padme than.
Yeah,
true. So if I would shorten it in some ways, I might lengthen in others because I have all these caveats. Well, anger in this way is good, but anger in this way is bad. So
yeah, no, literally, I think it could just be a couple drop-in lessons or whatever, and we'd have a real different story here.
It's like what Yoda really meant to say is
right.
Or Yoda was just plain wrong here.
I mean, for me, if I learn anything from at least the Jedi and Sith thing, it's like everything in moderation, I guess, not absolutes.
Right. Yeah, moderation. And also, like, again, which feelings are we grounding this in? We don't really want a moderate amount of hate. But yes, like seeing mom from time to time, why not? Seems good.
Right. Yeah. So what about morally gray characters? Those who do it in moderation, Han Solo's, roguishly handsome and all that, but also a smuggler and, a criminal and a gambler and, all those sorts of things.
Basically, he's a drug runner.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And, Boba Fett's like one of the most popular characters in Star Wars for whatever reason, but again, bounty hunter. Before the newer series, bounty hunter, we didn't really know much about him. So what does compassion, sympathy, empathy have to say about characters like that?
Yeah, I think I find Han's character, the reason why Han can still claim the title of good guy in the Star Wars series is because when the critical moments happen, he makes the good choice, right? And so like he has these gray things that he has going on that when it really matters, the last thing he did before he died was he touched his son's face, right? There was this like forgiveness, sorrow, like all affection, all of these things happened in this moment. So, I mean, this is why I think that we get to call him a good guy still, is because when the moments matter, he makes the right choice, the good choice.
And then shooting Greedo in the cantina was.
Oh, right. Yes. They had to rewrite that one apparently when they released.
Yeah. And I mean, for Boba Fett, from what we got in the original movies versus what we get in the TV show, has that sort of backstory, becoming part of like a group, a community, those sorts of things. But still kind of in the end, really being only loyal to himself, I would say.
Oftentimes we look at these characters like Boba Fett and we see that they may adhere to some sort of code. The basic bounty hunters are like, you don't poach other bounty hunters' stuff. I don't know, some sort of ethical code that lets them justify what they do, but also have some moral boundaries.
Right. There definitely is that. I think something else that's creeping into my mind right now that has less to do with these two characters, but just kind of legality in general is conscientious objection, right? So just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's right. And, within an ethical tradition, we're expected to do what's better than what's legally expected when a law is unjust.
Yeah. And certainly The Mandalorian comes to mind in that regard. I don't know if you've caught up on all the series, but, if he's supposed to kill Baby Yoda, or IG-11, right, is supposed to kill Baby Yoda, and Mando is supposed to bring him in for testing and experiments and stuff like that, and he doesn't.
He chooses, a different path. And I think that goes back to Finn as well, that, he has been told what's legal and he's decided, what, I know that this is wrong. And kind of goes to the flip side of Palpatine in the first movie. He's like, I will make it legal because, he can set the rules and morality has nothing to do with legality. And that's I think a big lesson in Star Wars is, there's the law and then there's right and wrong. Are there any things in Star Wars that they don't touch that maybe good things to talk about philosophically or ethically or?
Yeah. So one of the things that they kind of open up a can, but don't really give you a direction is when Luke goes to burn down the Jedi tree and and then Yoda does it for him. He decides he's not going to do it. And then Yoda's like, well, do it. And it's almost like there's this challenge. Did the Jedi Order really get it right anyways? Sort of thing. And we can't, or I can't, maybe I'll just offer it to you. What are your thoughts on what that could signify?
Yeah, to me, that is sort of Yoda realizing maybe in Force Death that he was wrong, right? That absolutes led to all of this sort of thing. That's at least because I have the same issue with Yoda, honestly. And so him coming back and sort of having that moment redeemed him a little bit for me.
So Yoda gets a redemption arc even.
Yeah.
I think that, he recognizes the failure of the Jedi and Luke talks about it, being hubris. But also, there's the whole thing that Yoda says is that Rey has everything she needs with her. And it's because Yoda knows that she already stole the books. And so burning down the tree is meaningless. It's something symbolic to get Luke. And that's the reason why the fire starts just as Luke is about to get there. That's when the lightning hits, is because Yoda doesn't want Luke to go inside and see the books are gone.
Wait, I thought Luke put the texts in the Millennium Falcon.
I never got that sense. I thought that Rey stole them and then you see them, later on.
I love that we have this opposite read of the situation, because to me, when Luke sneaks onto the Millennium Falcon and messes with the little, dangly gold thing, that's him putting those sacred texts in a drawer for Rey. Well, we'll put up a poll, what do people think? I'm sure they'll all side with you, and I've been reading it wrong. But
no, but it's an interesting way to interpret it that I just hadn't thought of that what if Luke was the one who stashed the books? But then why is he going to burn the tree then?
Right. Then, what's that about? So you're probably right.
Unless he's trying to say to the universe, look, I'm destroying the Jedi. This is the end. And then Yoda's like, yeah, okay, I'll watch you do this. Nope, I'll help you.
So if we're at our best when we're working together is one of the major kind of morals of it. I would say love wins is the other major piece of Star Wars. At the end of the day, maybe not the end of the episode, but at the end of the whole story, it's a very optimistic view of the arc of human history.
I'll keep shipping Poe and Finn then.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, can you tell us about your favorite Star Wars character?
So I have a very soft spot for all of the droids, the C-3PO, R2, and BB-8. There's this sweetness to all of them, and they're very other regarding. And you can easily say, well, they've been programmed to be other regarding. But at the same time, C-3PO, which he's the one who speaks, and so we can kind of have access to his thoughts more. When they're about to have to wipe his memory, he has this moment where he just wants to look at them and cherish them one last time, knowing that the next time he sees them, there will be strangers. But he's still willing to you can tell how much that means to him, and yet he's willing to make this sacrifice. So there is like this kind of sweetness to all of the droids, and this is probably a cheating answer, but my favorite character is not really any character, but the way that each character intersects with the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
So like what they bring out of and interplay with each other is probably my favorite thing of the whole series.
Yeah, no, I like that. This answer can sometimes mean everything about someone's profession, or it can sometimes just be their favorite character when they were 4 and had the action figures. So I like the range.
You just like that she said R2-D2 in there.
I mean, also R2-D2 is in fact, this is not an opinion. There is a correct answer to this question.
Well, wait, then what's yours, James?
I don't know. Like oftentimes I go to Chewbacca, he's, I guess I wouldn't say loyal. I'd say
Faithful.
Fidelitas.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I also like the roguish people. My favorite kind of non-film character is Hondo Ohnaka, who is just a hilarious pirate.
From what?
You see him in the Clone Wars, and he reappears in Rebels. And if you go to Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland, he is your host for the Smuggler's Run ride.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Probably will explain a lot about me. You find out who he is, and you're like, wow, James is... If someone was interested in going into your interdisciplinary field, how would they pursue that?
The quote easiest way is to get a PhD, which is never easy,
There's some really big scare quotes on that one. Easy way.
Yes. So I went to a theology school, and with theology, you can focus on history, biblical studies, a huge number of disciplines. Mine was ethics and social theory. And so, it was this intersection. I got to take classes at UC Berkeley in sociology. And so really kind of got a lot of different perspectives there. You can also just get your master's degree. So you wouldn't be able to typically teach at the graduate level, but you would get to teach at junior colleges and undergraduates typically. This is one way of doing it. And then you can also, I teach students to be in ministry, like hospital chaplains, to work in churches, to work in nonprofits. And, they're getting master's degrees. And so, if you don't need to form the people yourself, you just want to, be in the trenches with people who need help and work alongside them, getting a master's degree is a great way to do that too.
Do you have social media? Is there any place people can engage with you online or read some of your publications or anything like that?
Yeah, I do have a website, maureenkday.com. And it talks about my different publications and speaking engagements. You can just go there.
Fantastic. Well, we want to thank you very much for being here with us, talking about Star Wars and virtue ethics.
It was so fun to be here. I had a great time. This was a really fun conversation. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
And that wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We'd like to thank our guest, Maureen Day, and we'd like to thank all of you for listening.
If you're looking for the links we might have talked about, check out our show notes page, available at skywalkingthroughneverland.com/star-warsologies. And also check us out on YouTube, where we post some episodes with related visuals from Star Wars, mostly our convention panels.
And don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and get your friends to listen to us.
Yes, we are Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, and you can email us at starwarsologies@gmail.com. We have a fan group on Facebook also, where we post episodes and ask questions. I'm going to put that poll up, and it's very cleverly named Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group, so come join us there.
And if you have an idea for a topic or know a guest expert in our field, just reach out to us. No topic is off limits, even if the Emperor was wearing dentures or not.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including the Neverland Clubhouse and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. They also have a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History. You can look all of that up at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies.